Hi, I'm Brandon Powell, and this is Why It Matters. And today I want to talk about the parable of the dishonest manager. So in Luke 16, we have this really interesting parable from Jesus, where Jesus is seemingly setting up as the protagonist or as the hero of the parable someone who's a dishonest merchant. And that seems to go against everything that Jesus has taught before and after this. And so it doesn't really seem like it fits in the context of who Jesus is, who is God, who's perfect, who does not sin, who does not say things that aren't true. It doesn't seem like it matches that context. So what is this that's going on here? Well, in Luke chapter 16, in this parable, what happens is a dishonest merchant is serving a rich man. And he squanders, according to scripture, he squanders everything that the rich man had. And so the rich man is going to fire him as the manager. So the manager, who's dishonest, decides to sit there and he goes, well, I'm going to get fired. What am I going to do? I don't want to be a day laborer, and I don't want to beg, so I need to find some way to salvage this situation. So the dishonest manager invites all of these people who owe the rich man money. Now the manager would have the authority to write off debts, to buy things in the rich man's name, to really manage all of the rich man's affairs. So this dishonest manager invites all of these people who owe the rich man money, and the first guy comes up and he owes like 100 jars of olive oil. And the dishonest manager says, here, I'll write you a note that says you owe 80. So he's saving 20%. Another man comes up who owes 100 containers of wheat, and the dishonest manager says, here, I'll write you a note that says you only owe 50. So he's saving 50%. So at the end of the day, the rich man actually admires the shrewdness of this dishonest manager. And Jesus says the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. And that sounds like Jesus is actually commending or lifting up as an example people who are dishonest and saying we should use dishonest means. But that's not what's going on here. When you actually look at what this dishonest manager does, he is winning goodwill towards people. He is winning goodwill towards himself by cutting away debts, by relieving the burden on all of these people who owe the rich man money. They're going to look at this dishonest manager and go, wow, you're great. I love you. I'm so happy that I know you. And it kind of harkens back to Luke chapter 7 when you have the parable of the two sinners. Now Jesus goes into this house of Simon the Pharisee, and this Pharisee doesn't offer any refreshments to Jesus. He doesn't offer for his feet to be washed and anointed with oil. But there's this woman who comes and she just cries at his feet, cries on his feet, dries the tears with her hair. And Simon is just disgusted by this whole thing. So Jesus tells this parable and says there's these two people, and they both have different debts, and a master forgives both of the debts. And Jesus says to Simon, which one do you think would love the most? And Simon says, the one who had the most forgiven. And Jesus says, that's right. You don't think you've been forgiven anything. You don't think you need to be forgiven, so you haven't shown me any mercy or love. Well, this lady knows that she's been forgiven much and she's loved me much. And that really is exactly what the dishonest manager is doing. He knows he's about to lose everything. He's about to be kicked out of his business. And so by achieving all of this goodwill, by wiping away debt, the ones who have the most debt forgiven will be the most loving towards him. And so he's going to find a place to go. He's going to have someone put a roof over his head. He might have someone give him a job, because now he has all these people who look on him so favorably because he has used his wealth to achieve goodwill. And that's what Jesus is saying here. There is a problem here that those who don't know Jesus, those who are unrighteous and who have achieved their wealth by unrighteous means, know more about how to use their wealth to achieve goodwill than the people who are children of God. You go to any college campus and you will see people who have their names on the side of buildings. And sometimes even people like Vanderbilt who have the entire college named after them. Why? Well, it's not because they were great people. Some of them were horrible people who did horrible things and achieved their money in really dishonest ways. But instead, what you have someone who has donated a lot of money and helped some people in a means and for an effort of achieving goodwill towards themselves. So they want someone to sit there and think about their donation to the college rather than how they actually got the money. And as Christians, what can we learn from this? Well, what we can learn from this is that we also can use what we have received to achieve goodwill for good, to make a difference, that we can use our money for righteous means. And Jesus is talking about dishonest wealth. Well, all wealth is dishonest because it creates false promises. It makes promises towards us that it can't keep. When we look at wealth, we think of security, but there is no security because that wealth can disappear in a second because of the stock market or 1,000 other events. And we sit there and we think about wealth, we think about happiness, but it makes a promise of happiness that it cannot keep because wealth does not make us happy. And when we sit there and we look at Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says that you cannot serve two masters. You can't serve both God and money. The beautiful thing about when we become generous people, see, we should be able to look at all of these unrighteous people who are generous and go, they know how to be generous and they don't know Jesus. We who know Jesus should be even more generous than they. And so we should be able to look at that and go, I don't serve money. I serve God. And the beautiful thing about when we are generous, it actually helps us not to serve money. It helps us not to be a slave to money. Just think about it. If you are, actually you can go back to Luke chapter 16 and he says, whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest in much. You see, if we have just a little bit of wealth, but we are greedy and we are miserly and we are not generous with that very little, what do we think is going to happen when we get a lot? Do we think we're suddenly going to become very generous people? No, we're probably not going to be very generous people. We're still probably going to be greedy. We're still probably going to be selfish. We're still probably going to be miserly. And we're still probably going to be keep putting ourselves first. And we're going to become a slave, an unhappy slave to money. But when we turn around, if we are generous with a very little, not only can God do an amazing amount with just a little bit of generosity on our part, but we build up the characteristics that we can one day be generous if God gives us even more. And maybe God will give us more so that we can be more generous. But when we are generous with just a very little, when we look at our resources and say, how can I achieve goodwill? How can I do good for other people? How can I achieve praise for the name of God with this? Then God does not only beautiful things, but we are free to worship God. That's really what it's talking about. Well, if we make friends with dishonest, if we take this wealth which makes all these lies to us and we give it away and we help other people and we are generous with other people, then not only do we achieve goodwill, but we will be welcomed into an eternal home. Heaven. That's supposed to be our perspective. Our eyes are always supposed to be on heaven. And that Jesus also says, don't store up treasures for yourself where thieves can steal and moths destroy and things rust. Store up treasures in heaven. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Treasures in heaven. So when we look at this parable in Luke chapter 16, where it seems like Jesus is commending somebody's bad behavior, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that if this person who is dishonest knows about how to be generous and do good things with wealth, then those who know Jesus, not only should we be more motivated to do good, but we should know even more about how to do good, because we should be doing it out of the love of Christ. And in that way, we can fulfill Jesus's command to love our neighbor as ourselves. So the question I think we have to ask ourselves is, do we know how to be generous? Or do we keep waiting for one day down the road when we have more, that's when we will be generous? We who are righteous should know how to use our money for righteous things. And if we have our eye on heaven, then that's what we can do. I'm Brandon Powell. This is Why It Matters. God bless.